Welcome back. In this video, we are going to finalize the application, and therefore we're going to use the start activity for result functionality, as well as we are going to basically send over the details from our other activities to this result activity, which needs to know, first of all, what's the name of the user who won, and then the score. So we need to know how many questions were there in total, and we need to know how many questions were answered correctly. So these are the details we need to pass. So let's go ahead and actually build this in our project. Therefore, let's go ahead to our constants, because our constants are going to contain constant variables. And whenever you send data from one activity to another, it's good to store the name under which you stored the details that you want to have in a constant. So this will make a lot more sense once we get started with it. So const val, I'm going to call this one user underscore name, and here it's common practice to use capitalized letters and use underscores when you have a name with multiple words. Okay, so here this will be of type string, and I'm going to say that the username will be the underscore user name. So this string is how it will be stored internally, and that's the constant name that I'm using. So I'm passing the username, and I'm also going to have to pass the total amount of questions. So let's create the constant value, total underscore questions, which will also be of type string, and it will contain the value called total questions, like so. And then I need the correct answer. So I will create another const val correct answers, which will be of type string also, and it will have the string correct answers stored. So these are just going to be the keys, so to speak, under which we are storing. So the location, so to speak, under which we are storing the details so that we can retrieve them when we are moving data from one activity to another. Okay, so let's go over to our very first activity, our main activity, where we now need to send the data over. So once we click on the button and this intent starts, we are starting an activity. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start this activity, but we're also going to pass additional data. So you can do that by using putExtra on an intent. So an intent can have extra information that you send over from one activity to another, and you can then retrieve the information on the other activity. So here I'm going to use this putExtra method, and you can see there are many different overloads. One with a name, which is the key, and then the value being integer, byte, char, long, and so forth. So you can send over all kinds of data. Okay, and here you can see what you can send over. Okay, so even serializable and parcelable files, which is basically a way how you can send entire classes over. But we're going to see that only later. Now it's not necessary. So first of all, I will need to pass in a key here, which is the first entry in the putExtra. So I'm going to use this constant here because it's good practice. Of course, I could have just written something like username here. That would have been fine as well, as long as I know on the other side that I also need to retrieve username. But it's just good practice to use constants here, because if I use hard-coded strings, I might run into errors. So here I will pass over the name. And where do I get it from? Well, I get it from the added text here, which is the added text where we can enter our name here. So this is the added text. So whatever I enter here is what I want to put extra to the intent. So etname dot text to string, because I want to pass a string and not a char sequence. So now I'm sending over the data with this intent, and I'm sending it not to the result activity, but to the one that I'm going to do with this intent, which is the questions activity. So here in the questions activity, I can now retrieve this information. So I can retrieve the name, and I'm going to create a new variable here, private var, which will be my username. So username, which will be of type string, nullable, and I'm going to set that to null at first. And then inside of the onCreate method, I will use username to set the value. And I get it from the intent. So intent.get string extra at the position of constants dot username. Okay, so this is how I can now use the intent that got me to this activity, and I get its details at the position of the username. And I'm using getStringExtra because it was a string that I sent over. So here in the main activity, I used the putExtra method with a string that I sent over. So I need to retrieve it as a string by using the getStringExtra. You can see that intent has a bunch of different gets. So get boolean extra, get byte extra, get int float double extra. So all of that exists, and this would be of course used depending on what kind of data you are sending over. Okay, so now when would be a good point to send over the details? So sending over how many questions I have answered correctly, how many questions there are in total, and the username. Well, I'd say once we click on the button. So we have this onClick method and we click on the button submit. And once we click on the button, currently we are setting the question here when we still have questions left, but if we don't have any questions left, that's where we are going over to the end result screen. Here we had this make text toast, which just said you made it to the end. So instead of using this toast, I'm just going to now send the program over to this other activity by creating a new intent, as always. So here we need to use the intent class and we need to import it with using Alt-Enter. We need to pass in the context, which will be this. And we need to say to which activity we want to go. And I'm going to go to the result activity, which I can do like so. Okay, now this intent will need to get extra details. So I'm going to put extra. On one hand, it's going to be the username that I'm sending over, which means I'm going to use this username global variable that I created. I'm going to send over the correct answers. So constants dot correct answers, so the amount of correct answers, and that is stored in m correct answers. I think we don't have that variable yet. Let me check. Do we have a variable? No. We need to have a global variable which stores how many answers we have correct. So private var m correct answers, which will be of type int, and we can set that to 0 at the beginning. And now we need to increase or increment the amount of answers given that were correct. And what would be a good spot to do that? I'd say each time that we click onto an answer here, when we get the correct answer. Well, the thing is, here we're checking if we got the incorrect answer. So now we can have this else block where we have the correct answer. And here we will increment the m correct answers by 1. So inside of my onClick, once I click on the button submit, I'm in the else block, which means in the else of I don't have the selected option position being 0. So I'm not at the very first question. Then I get the question that I need to display, and I'm checking if I chose the right answer, right? And then depending on that, if I chose the wrong answer, which is what this if statement checks, I'm setting the color to red. And if I'm selecting the right answer, which is this else block, I say, okay, I have another correct answer. And at the same time, I'm setting the correct answer being green after that, okay? So I don't have to put it in here because I want to set it green anyways, if I selected it or if I didn't select it correct. Okay, so now let's get back to our submit button when we are at the end of the question. So at this point, we don't have any questions left, right? And we want to go to the final screen. So we need to put extra m correct answers. So here m correct answers. And then finally, we need to put extra the total amount of questions. So how many questions that we have. And here I'm going to get that from my questions list, which is a nullable. So I need to add the question mark here dot size. So I'm just saying, okay, just say however many questions are there in total and send that over. So that's what this dot size gets. And here we of course need to start the activity with that intent that we had set up here. And then finally, I need to finish this activity because I don't want the user to be able to jump back to the questions screen. He should only be able to, when clicking the back button, be able to get back to the start screen. All right, so that is it from this side. Now in the results activity, we need to retrieve all of this information. And in order to use it, we need to first set up our user interface views, which means I need to have a name, which will be a text view. And by the way, I'm not creating them outside of this method, this onCreate method, because I don't have any other methods. Otherwise, I would create global variables as we have done here. You can see we created all of those text views globally outside of the onCreate method. But as I stated, we don't need that in our result activity because it's not going to have any separate methods that will be required. So we have this text view, we find it by its ID. And here, let me import text view and find it via r.id.tv_name. Okay, so it's this text view here, username. We're in the result screen right now, right? So this username has to be gotten. Okay, so now that we have that, I would like you to set up the rest of the items yourself. So pause the video now and set up the other text views. Okay, I hope you paused the video, and now let's just put that up here. Now the next challenge for you is, please use the intent get string extra as we have done in the question thingy here. Get that extra with the username and assign it to the right text view. Which one will it be? It will be this TV name. So please go ahead and try that. Okay, I hope you tried it. So I will just set up TV name.text to be the intent.get string extra at the position of constants dot, and this will be the username. And now also retrieve the other values. So the amount of total questions and correct answers. And this will be a little tricky. Okay, so you can try it, but it is a little different to what we've seen before. Okay, so let me just show you. Total question, and this will be a new variable. So total questions will be from the intent as well. And here we're not using the get string extra, but we're getting the get int extra. And why is that? Well, because if we look at it, where we set it, it's down here. We put extra details, but correct answer, if you hover over it and you jump to it, actually, you see it's of type int. And amount of total questions is also going to be an int. So we need to get int extra this time. At the position of constants total question, we get this int extra. Now you see that our IDE is not very happy. Android Studio wants to get some more details because get int extra, if you look at it, needs a default value of type integer. All right, so let's give it that default value because we're going to say if we didn't get any value, we're going to use the default value of 0. So the total amount of questions would then be 0. And then we need another one for the correct answers. And that one will be gotten, and it's answers, plural. That one will be gotten also via an int extra. So get int extra, like so, with the constants dot, and we called it correct answers. There we are. And we need to pass in a default value. I'm going to say the correct answers will be 0. So you see, we're using this constants correct answers. I could have also just used it like this, correct underscore answers. That would have done the same thing, but as I stated here, for example, I wrote correct answers, so now my program would crash because it doesn't find this extra detail, or at least it would use the default value instead, because we have stored it under correct answers, which is why it's a really good idea to use constants here. Okay, which is why I also do it here, constants. Okay. So now we can use these details to display them in our text view score. So here we can now say the text. So now we just need to set up the score. So this TV score text should be your score is, and then it's going to be the correct answer as well as, well, out of total answers, or total questions, better said. And then finally, we have this button. You can see here, well, you can't see here, but let me just get to the final screen, this button here. And what I want is I want this to send me back to the main activity, so to the screen. And I cannot just say finish, because this would close this activity entirely and would jump over to the, well, would close the whole application basically. So we want to avoid that, and we do that by, well, first of all, setting an on-click listener here beautifully, and starting an activity where we just go ahead and create the intent directly inside of this activity. So you don't need to create the intent in an extra line. You can do it all in one line. So here I'm going to over from this result activity to the main activity, and here : class.java is how you can do it. So now let's actually see if any of that works. And then we can enter John, because that's not my name. Let's select Argentina. Let's select Australia. Let's select Brazil. Well, I didn't select Brazil there, and I cannot go back. Anyways, this is Belgium, and let's just click through until we're at the final spot. You see now it says finish, and we are done. So hey, congratulations, Sean. Your score is 3 out of 9, and I wouldn't say that it's great, but at least that's what our application is going to show. It's always going to be positive, right? Which is great. So now we can just click on finish, and we can start from scratch. All right, so that's pretty much the application. That's the quiz. Now it's your job to make changes to it. First of all, to go to your constants and now create a bunch of other questions. Use your own images. Create, I don't know, like 100 questions or so, and then use some of them randomly and so forth. Okay, so this will be a little more of a challenge. See this as an actual challenge, because doing this by yourself will actually force you to learn how to do it. I can just show you how it's generally done, and this is like learning a language where you step by step, well, I'm just teaching you how to speak the words and how grammar works, but in the end you have to speak it yourself in order to really learn the language. Okay, and to be able to speak to people, you need to speak. That's how it is with coding. In order to learn coding, you need to code, and you need to try it by yourself and not just code along like I code some stuff for you, and that would be too easy. So good luck with that, and feel free to share your results in your application with us once you have finished it.